Hello there, weary traveler, and welcome back to this cozy corner of history where we explore the stories that time tried to bury. Tonight, we're journeying to ancient Athens to witness one of history's most shocking contradictions: how the birthplace of democracy systematically silenced half its population, trapping teenage girls in lives so restricted they would make a modern prison seem spacious. Whether you're nestled under warm blankets ready to drift off to sleep, or simply seeking to unwind with some gentle historical storytelling, I'm so grateful you've chosen to spend this evening with me. If you don't mind, I'd love to know where in the world you're tuning in from tonight, and what time of day it is for you right now. Feel free to leave a comment and let me know. It's always such a comfort to see our community of history enthusiasts gathered here from every corner of the globe. And if you find peace in these calm, immersive tales from ages past, go ahead and click that subscribe button so you don't miss our next journey together. But for now, let's allow the gentle weight of modern comfort to settle around you as we travel back to a time and place where being born female meant discovering that every aspect of your future, who you marry, where you live, even when you can leave your house, had already been decided by men who saw you not as a person, but as property to be transferred from one owner to another. Tonight, we're climbing the narrow stairs to the gynaikon, following a story that will remind us just how precious our freedom of choice truly is. Picture yourself settling deeper into your pillow as we begin this tale of 15-year-old Korinna, daughter of Alexios the Potter, whose story reveals the brutal truth about women's lives in the civilization that gave us philosophy, theater, and the very concept of freedom. Close your eyes if you wish, and let your breathing slow as we explore together what it meant to live as a teenage girl in a world that had already decided your fate. Take a deep breath with me now, feeling the softness of your bedding, the warmth of your room, the safety of your walls. Hold on to that comfort as we journey back to 420 before Christ, to a world where such simple pleasures existed alongside the most sophisticated civilization humanity had yet created, yet where half of that civilization lived in conditions of confinement that would shock even our darkest expectations. The gynaikon breathes around Korinna like a living thing constructed of stone and timber, and the accumulated sighs of all the women who have inhabited this space before her, each one adding her own layer of resignation to walls that seem to exhale the very essence of feminine limitation. As you rest in your comfortable bed tonight, feel grateful for the space around you. The freedom to move from room to room without permission, to step outside whenever you choose, to breathe air that carries no restrictions save those you place upon yourself. The room where Korinna awakens measures perhaps 12 feet by 15, larger than the hovels where the poorest Athenians huddle together for warmth, yet smaller than many modern closets. A space that manages to be simultaneously generous by the standards of the desperate and cramped beyond endurance, for a soul that yearns to expand beyond the boundaries society has drawn around it. The single window, carefully positioned to provide light for the endless weaving that fills their days, while preventing any meaningful view of the street below, frames a rectangle of sky that changes color with the hours but never offers escape. Never provides access to the larger world that pulses with life and possibility just beyond reach. Through this window comes the morning breeze that carries the scents of the agora, roasting barley, fresh fish from Piraeus, the exotic spices that speak of distant lands where ships arrive bearing treasures from places Korinna will never see, never visit, never even dream of visiting, because dreaming of the impossible has become a luxury she can no longer afford. As you breathe freely in your own space tonight, perhaps take a moment to appreciate the simple miracle of being able to plan a journey, to imagine visiting new places, to make choices about where your life might take you. freedoms that Korinna could never have imagined. The architecture of the house itself speaks to the careful segregation that governs Athenian life, with the women's quarters positioned above the men's chambers like a secret kept in an attic, like valuable but fragile goods stored away from careless handling. The narrow staircase that connects their world to the masculine realm below might as well be a mountain pass for all the freedom it represents. Each step down requires permission, justification, careful consideration of reputation and propriety, and the 100 subtle ways a woman's value can be damaged by the smallest misstep. The wooden steps, worn smooth by generations of careful feminine feet, seem to whisper warnings with each creak. Be cautious, be modest, be invisible, be grateful for the narrow space you have been allotted. Feel the solid ground beneath your bed tonight, the knowledge that you can walk wherever your feet might carry you, that the world extends in all directions from where you rest, open and available should you choose to explore it. Korinna's few possessions rest in a wooden chest that contains the sum total of what she might call her own, though ownership itself proves an illusion when everything she touches belongs ultimately to her father and will someday belong to her husband. The chest holds 2 chitons, one for daily wear, dyed the modest brown that speaks of middle-class respectability, and one for festivals, a shade of blue that proclaims her family's aspirations without overstepping the boundaries that separate them from their betters. A handful of ribbons for her hair, a small bronze mirror that reflects her face back at her like a question without an answer, a few pieces of jewelry that represent not ornamentation, but investment, portable wealth that can be converted to coin if necessity demands. Consider, as you rest surrounded by your own possessions, how remarkable it is to own things simply because you enjoy them, to purchase items for pleasure rather than necessity, to accumulate belongings that reflect your personality rather than your economic value to others. The bronze mirror, when she lifts it with hands that shake slightly in the morning chill, shows her a face that has learned to wear patience like a mask. Features that might be called beautiful if beauty in women were valued for its own sake, rather than as currency in the marriage market. Her reflection reveals dark eyes that once sparkled with curiosity about the world beyond these walls, now holding the careful blankness of someone who has learned that curiosity leads to disappointment, that questions invite answers she is not permitted to hear, that wonder itself can become a form of suffering when it focuses on possibilities that will never be offered. The morning ablutions become a meditation on the female body as both temple and prison, as the vessel that makes her valuable and the burden that makes her dangerous. The cool water her mother has provided carries the earthy taste of the well that serves their neighborhood, water drawn by women whose daily journey to the fountain house represents one of the few sanctioned excursions beyond domestic walls. One of the precious moments when feminine community can flourish under the careful supervision of tradition and necessity. As she splashes her face and hands, Korinna thinks of all the women who have performed this same ritual, in this same spirit of careful preparation for another day of careful limitation. Feel the clean water that flows so easily from your taps tonight. The simple miracle of water that requires no dangerous journey to collect, no careful rationing, no consideration of who might see you or judge you for the basic human need of quenching thirst or washing your face. The ritual of dressing becomes an exercise in the semiotics of feminine submission, each layer of clothing a statement about status, propriety, and the careful balance between attractiveness and modesty that society demands of unmarried women. The linen undergarment, rough against skin that has never known silk, serves as reminder that comfort is a luxury to be earned through marriage to a man wealthy enough to provide it. The woolen chiton, draped and pinned with the precision that years of practice have made automatic, transforms her body into a proper vessel for social expectations. covered enough to avoid scandal, fitted enough to suggest the fertility that represents her primary value, colored in the muted tones that speak of respectability without presumption. Her hair, that dark cascade that must be arranged with the same careful attention devoted to the display of precious goods in the marketplace, becomes both her glory and her burden. Each strand must be positioned to suggest beauty without wantonness, youth without impropriety, fertility without availability. The bronze pins that hold it in place dig slightly into her scalp, a constant low-level discomfort that serves as reminder of the eternal vigilance required to maintain feminine reputation. A single hair out of place, a pin positioned too provocatively, a style that suggests vanity rather than modest care. Any of these small failures can damage the carefully constructed image upon which her family's hopes rest. Tonight, as you prepare for sleep, perhaps run your fingers through your own hair. Hair that you can cut, color, or style however pleases you. Hair that represents self-expression rather than social currency. Hair that belongs to you and you alone. The morning light that fills the gynaikon reveals the tools and symbols of feminine existence arranged with the careful order of a shrine to domestic obligation. The large loom, where her mother shapes thread into cloth, stands like an altar to feminine industry, its wooden frame worn smooth by generations of women's hands, its surface bearing the accumulated oil of countless fingers working to transform raw material into the textiles that clothe their world. The smaller loom, where Korinna practices the more complex patterns required of a well-trained wife, serves as her own personal instrument of preparation, each completed piece adding to the dowry that will eventually purchase her a husband and a new set of walls to contain her existence. Baskets filled with wool in various stages of preparation cluster around the looms like offerings to the goddess of domestic duty. Some freshly shorn and still carrying the scent of the hills where sheep graze, some already cleaned and combed into the silky smoothness that will become thread, some dyed in the colors that speak of modest prosperity and careful husbandry of resources. The clay spindles, worn smooth by countless hours of use, rest in neat rows like soldiers prepared for battle, each one a weapon in the eternal war against idleness that society wages upon women's time and energy. Rest tonight knowing that your hours belong to you, that the work you choose to do serves purposes you have selected, that your hands create things that please you rather than merely fulfill the expectations others have placed upon your shoulders. The morning meal, when it comes, arrives with the weight of careful calculation that governs every aspect of their domestic economy. Barley bread baked from grain that represents a significant portion of their household budget, olive oil that speaks of the careful balance between nutrition and expense, perhaps a few olives or a small piece of cheese if the week's sales have gone well. Each bite carries the knowledge that food is never taken for granted in a world where prosperity fluctuates with the seasons, with the demands of war, with the 100 unpredictable factors that can transform a modest but comfortable existence into desperate struggle. As Korinna eats in the careful silence that marks feminine meals, no boisterous conversation, no heated debate about politics or philosophy, just the quiet communion of women sharing sustenance and unspoken understanding. She listens to the sounds that drift up from the men's quarters below. Her father and brother discuss the day ahead with the casual confidence of those whose plans matter, whose decisions carry weight, whose choices shape not just their own lives, but the lives of others. Their voices rise and fall with the energy of minds engaged with the larger world, while the women above them consume their portion in the subdued tones appropriate to those whose primary function is to enable rather than to lead. As you drift toward sleep tonight, perhaps reflect on how naturally you speak your thoughts aloud, how easily you express opinions, how freely you debate ideas with anyone who cares to listen. Freedoms that Korinna could only observe from behind walls that separated her, from full participation in human discourse. The morning light that streams through their narrow window catches the dust motes dancing in the air like tiny spirits suspended between freedom and captivity, each particle floating on currents invisible to the eye, yet powerful enough to carry them wherever the wind wills. A freedom of movement that Korinna envies with the bitter intensity of someone who understands that even the smallest specks of matter enjoy liberties denied to her. The quality of this light changes subtly as the sun climbs higher, transforming the familiar objects of the gynaikon into something almost mystical, as if the ordinary tools of feminine labor might suddenly reveal themselves as instruments of magic, capable of weaving not just thread into cloth, but dreams into reality. Yet even in moments when beauty transforms the mundane into something approaching the sacred, Korinna remains aware that she views the world through bars of custom and tradition that no amount of wishful thinking can dissolve. The large loom dominates the space like an ancient oracle, its wooden frame blackened with age and worn smooth by the countless hands that have worked its mechanism, each woman adding her own layer of oil and sweat and perhaps tears to its surface until it seems less like a tool and more like a living thing that breathes with the rhythm of feminine labor. The steady thock-thock-thock of the beater bar against the weft creates a percussion that measures time not in hours or minutes, but in the slow accumulation of progress, each strike adding another thread to the growing fabric, another moment to the endless cycle of production that justifies feminine existence and provides the textiles that clothe their world. Penthesilea works at the loom with the practiced efficiency of someone for whom this labor has become as natural as breathing. Her body moving in the ancient dance of weaving that women have performed since time immemorial, her hands guiding the shuttle through the warp threads with a precision that speaks of decades spent perfecting this essential skill. The rhythm of her work creates a hypnotic background that fills the silence between mother and daughter, a wordless communication that speaks of shared understanding, inherited knowledge, and the peculiar intimacy that develops between women who spend their lives in close quarters, dependent upon each other for company and comfort in a world that offers them little of either. Your stitches grow more even, Penthesilea observes without looking up from her work, her voice carrying the weight of instruction given countless times before, lessons that must be repeated until they become as automatic as breath, as unconscious as heartbeat. Remember that a husband's eye notices imperfection even when he lacks the knowledge to understand the skill required for excellence. A woman's work must be beyond reproach because reproach itself carries consequences that extend far beyond the immediate task. Her words settle into the morning air like sediment in still water, carrying with them the accumulated wisdom of generations of women who have learned to judge their own worth by the standards of those who will never attempt the work themselves. Korinna adjusts her grip on the needle, forcing her fingers into the precise position that will create the tiny, perfect stitches her future depends upon, each movement guided by muscle memory developed through years of practice and reinforced by the constant awareness that competence in domestic arts represents the difference between security and catastrophe in a woman's life. The linen beneath her hands feels rough against skin that has been softened by the olive oil her mother hoards for special occasions, the contrast serving as reminder that even the simplest luxuries come with costs that must be carefully weighed against competing necessities. Tonight, as you rest between sheets that you chose for their softness, their color, their simple appeal to your personal preferences, remember that such choices represent freedoms that most women throughout history could never have imagined. The morning proceeds with the measured pace of ritual, each task flowing into the next, with the inevitability of seasons changing, of tides turning, of time itself moving forward regardless of individual desire or resistance. Korinna sorts wool with the meditative focus of a priestess performing sacred duties, her fingers learning to distinguish between grades of quality through touch alone, developing the expertise that will make her valuable to a future husband's household. The finest wool, soft as silk and white as marble, will become the undergarments that only the most prosperous families can afford. The coarser grades, still valuable but requiring different treatment, will be transformed into the sturdy fabrics that serve for daily wear, for household linens, for the 100 practical applications that make civilized life possible. Each handful of wool carries its own story. The sheep that grew it while grazing on hillsides she will never see, the shepherds who tended the flocks while breathing air that she can only imagine, the merchants who transported it to Athens through landscapes that exist for her only in the tales told by others. As her fingers work to separate the tangled fibers, removing bits of grass and debris that speak of pastoral freedom, Korinna finds herself wondering about those hillsides, those shepherds, those merchants who move through the world with the casual confidence of those for whom travel represents opportunity rather than impossibility. Let your own mind wander tonight as sleep approaches, grateful for the knowledge that you can transform wonder into reality, that curiosity can lead to exploration, that dreams of distant places might someday become memories of journeys actually taken. The conversation that flows between mother and daughter as they work carries undercurrents of instruction, warning, and shared understanding that would be invisible to masculine ears but resonates with meaning for those who must navigate the treacherous waters of feminine existence in a world designed for male convenience. Penthesilea speaks of neighbors, of marriages arranged and dissolved, of women who have succeeded in finding contentment within their prescribed roles, and others who have discovered that contentment itself can be a luxury beyond their reach. Each story carries its own lesson, its own warning, its own glimpse into the possibilities and limitations that await Korinna in the years ahead. Lysandra's marriage progresses well. Her mother reports, her voice carrying the careful neutrality of someone discussing weather or crop yields rather than a friend's intimate circumstances. Her husband treats her with consideration, and she is already quickened with child. If the gods grant her a son, her position will be secure. The words hang in the air between them, carrying weight that extends far beyond their literal meaning, speaking to the fundamental uncertainty that governs every woman's life. The knowledge that security depends not on personal virtue or individual achievement, but on the biological lottery that determines the sex of children, the fragile health that governs successful pregnancy, the mysterious factors that influence masculine satisfaction with feminine performance. Korinna thinks of Lysandra, once her closest friend, now separated from her by the gulf that marriage creates between the wed and unwed, the initiated and the innocent, those who have crossed the threshold into wifehood and those who still wait in the antechamber of possibility. The last time they met, at a religious festival where unmarried and married women might briefly mingle under carefully supervised circumstances, Lysandra's eyes held a knowledge that Korinna could not yet decipher. Part satisfaction, part resignation, part something else entirely that seemed to speak of experiences for which no preparation can prove adequate. The needle moves through linen with the steady rhythm of breathing, each stitch a small accomplishment that accumulates toward larger goals, each completed seam bringing Korinna closer to the competence that will make her marriageable and the marriageability that will make her life possible. The repetitive nature of the work allows her mind to drift, to imagine, to wonder about the lives of women in other places, other times, other circumstances where perhaps the boundaries might be drawn differently, where feminine potential might find expression in ways that Athens does not permit. She has heard fragments of stories about places where women hold property, practice medicine, even rule kingdoms. But these tales feel as distant and impossible as myths about creatures with wings or mortals who ascend to Olympus. The reality that surrounds her speaks too loudly of limitation, of boundaries enforced by law and custom and the accumulated weight of tradition, for fantasy to take root and flourish. Yet even as her rational mind dismisses such stories as impossible, something deep within her chest responds to them with a longing so intense it feels almost like hunger, like thirst, like the desperate need for air experienced by those who have been underwater too long. Sleep tonight with gratitude for living in an age when such stories are not fairy tales, but daily reality. When women do indeed hold property and practice medicine and rule nations, when the impossible dreams of ancient girls have become the ordinary possibilities of your own life. The morning light shifts and changes as the sun climbs higher, transforming the familiar objects of the gynaikon into studies in light and shadow that speak to the beauty that exists even within the most constrained circumstances. The bronze implements catch and reflect the illumination. The clay vessels glow with warm earthen tones. The colored threads seem to pulse with life and possibility. In these moments, when light transforms the ordinary into something approaching the magical, Korinna finds glimpses of wonder that sustain her through the long stretches of routine, the endless repetition, the careful management of hope that never quite becomes expectation. The sun reaches its zenith as the household settles into the rhythm of midday rest, that sacred pause when even the most industrious souls acknowledge the need for respite from labor and the body's requirement for sustenance and renewal. Yet for Korinna, this break in activity brings not relief, but a different kind of weight, the weight of time stretching ahead like an endless scroll, each hour marked not by accomplishment or progress toward chosen goals, but by the slow accumulation of days that bring her closer to an inevitable transformation she cannot control, cannot escape, cannot even properly prepare for, since preparation requires knowledge, and knowledge requires experience, and experience is precisely what her sheltered existence has been designed to prevent. The simple meal that marks the midday pause carries with it the complex calculations that govern every aspect of their domestic economy, each portion carefully measured against the competing demands of nutrition, expense, and the unpredictable fluctuations in income that come with depending upon the sale of pottery in a market where beauty and utility must compete with necessity and affordability. The barley bread, dense and dark with the coarse grain that speaks of practical rather than luxury choices, fills the stomach without providing the satisfaction that comes with abundance, with choice, with the kind of plenty that allows eating to become pleasure rather than mere sustenance. The olive oil that glistens on their bread represents hours of labor by women whose names they will never know, whose faces they will never see, who pressed the olives and filtered the oil and stored it in amphorae that traveled from distant groves to arrive at their modest table. Each drop carries within it the taste of earth and sunshine and the accumulated work of hands that understand, as Korinna's hands are learning to understand, that women's labor often remains invisible even as it sustains the visible world, provides the foundation upon which masculine achievement rests, creates the comfort and stability that allows others to pursue dreams and ambitions that will never be offered to those who make them possible. As they eat in the companionable silence that has developed between them over years of shared confinement, shared understanding, shared acceptance of circumstances neither can change, Korinna listens to the sounds that drift up from the workshop below, where her father and brother discuss business with the casual confidence of those whose opinions matter, whose decisions carry consequences beyond the immediate moment, whose plans shape not just their own futures, but the futures of others. Their voices rise and fall with the energy of minds engaged with problems that extend beyond domestic concerns, beyond the careful management of household resources, beyond the narrow sphere that contains feminine existence. The conversation she hears fragments of speaks to the larger world that pulses just beyond her reach. Discussions of commissions for wealthy households, debates about the merits of different clay compositions, plans for expanding the workshop if business continues to prosper. Each word represents a choice freely made, a path selected from multiple possibilities, a future shaped by personal ambition rather than biological destiny. The contrast between their expansive planning and her own careful preparation for a role she did not choose, in a life she cannot design, with a man she has barely met, creates a pain in her chest that has no name in any language she knows. Her brother Dionysios, 2 years younger but infinitely freer, speaks of his morning at the gymnasium with the enthusiasm of someone for whom physical activity represents opportunity rather than dangerous display, education rather than potential scandal, social interaction rather than carefully supervised encounter. His voice carries the bright confidence of someone whose body belongs to himself, whose strength serves his own purposes, whose athletic achievement reflects his own character rather than his potential value to others. When he describes the wrestling matches, the foot races, the discussions with his fellow students about philosophy and politics, and the great questions that shape their world, Korinna feels the familiar mixture of love and envy that comes with caring deeply for someone whose freedom highlights your own captivity. Rest tonight knowing that the education you received, the books you can read, the ideas you can explore, the physical activities you can pursue, all represent victories won by countless women who refused to accept that knowledge and strength and intellectual growth should remain masculine privileges. The afternoon stretches ahead with the familiar promise of more weaving, more spinning, more of the endless domestic labor that fills the hours between dawn and sunset, while contributing to the dowry that will eventually purchase her a husband and a new set of walls to contain her existence. Yet today the routine feels heavier than usual, weighted with the knowledge that marriage negotiations may soon begin, that the careful accumulation of domestic skills and textile goods may soon be evaluated by strangers who will judge her worth according to criteria she can influence but cannot control. Penthesilea speaks carefully of practical matters, her voice carrying the weight of experience earned through years of navigating the complex requirements of feminine existence in a world designed for masculine convenience. The marriage of Euphemia's daughter proceeds favorably, she reports, her tone carefully neutral as she discusses what might serve as either encouragement or warning, depending upon interpretation. The dowry proved adequate, the young man's family expressed satisfaction with her domestic skills, and the contracts were signed without dispute. She seems content enough with her circumstances, though contentment itself takes different forms for different temperaments. The words settle between them like stones dropped into still water, creating ripples of meaning that extend far beyond their immediate significance. Korinna understands that her mother is trying to prepare her for realities that cannot be avoided, only accepted with greater or lesser grace, only met with greater or lesser resistance, only endured with greater or lesser success. The careful language speaks to the delicate balance between honesty and kindness, between preparation and protection, between truth and the kind of gentle deception that makes unbearable circumstances slightly more bearable. As the afternoon light slants through their narrow window, casting shadows that shift and change with the sun's movement across the sky, Korinna finds herself studying her mother's face for clues about the nature of the transformation that awaits her. Penthesilea's features, once beautiful in their own right, now bear the particular kind of weariness that comes with years of careful compromise, endless small surrenders, the gradual erosion of self that occurs when identity becomes entirely defined by service to others. Yet beneath the resignation, Korinna glimpses something else, a core of strength that has survived all the accommodations, all the limitations, all the daily small deaths that feminine existence requires. Tell me about your marriage, Korinna requests, her voice barely above a whisper, as if speaking too loudly might shatter the fragile intimacy of the moment, or invite the attention of household gods who might disapprove of such questioning, such curiosity about experiences that must be lived rather than understood through description. Tell me what it felt like to stop being yourself and become someone else. The question hangs between them like incense, heavy with meaning and possibility, and the kind of dangerous honesty that women rarely permit themselves in a world where survival depends upon careful management of truth, upon the strategic deployment of silence, upon the cultivation of patience that borders on the supernatural. Penthesilea sets down her needle and looks directly at her daughter, her eyes holding the accumulated weight of 27 years of marriage, of motherhood, of the particular kind of love that develops between women who depend upon each other for understanding in a world that offers them little. You do not stop being yourself, she says finally, her voice carrying the authority of lived experience, of lessons learned through trial and accommodation, and the slow development of wisdom that comes only to those who have navigated impossible circumstances with their essential humanity intact. You learn to carry yourself more quietly, to express yourself in smaller gestures, to find satisfaction in achievements that others might not recognize as achievements at all. You become like water taking the shape of whatever vessel contains it, while remaining fundamentally unchanged in your essential nature. The afternoon light that fills the gynaikon seems to pulse with this revelation, this glimpse into the mystery of feminine adaptation, the secret knowledge that women pass between themselves about survival, about persistence, about the ways in which the human spirit learns to flourish even in the smallest spaces, even under the most restrictive circumstances. Korinna feels something shift within her chest, not quite hope, but something related to hope. Not quite understanding, but something that approaches understanding. Not quite peace, but something that suggests peace might be possible, even within the boundaries that will soon define her existence. The needle returns to its work. The thread continues its journey through linen. The afternoon proceeds with its measured pace toward evening and the new challenges that darkness will bring. Yet something has changed in the quality of the silence between mother and daughter. Some barrier has been crossed, some knowledge has been shared that will make the path ahead, if not easier, then at least less mysterious, less frightening, less absolute in its finality. Let this comfort you as you drift toward sleep. The knowledge that human dignity persists even under impossible circumstances, that love finds ways to flourish even within the strictest constraints, that the essential self remains inviolate even when external circumstances seem designed to crush it entirely. The afternoon light that filters through their window carries with it the weight of time itself, each ray speaking to the inexorable passage of days and seasons and years that transform children into adults, possibilities into realities, dreams into memories of dreams half remembered and entirely surrendered. In this light, the familiar objects of the gynaikon take on an almost sacramental quality, as if the looms and spindles and baskets of wool have become the instruments of some ancient ritual, some ceremony of transformation that women have been performing since the beginning of time, since the first mother taught the first daughter that survival requires adaptation, acceptance, the cultivation of strength that appears as softness, wisdom that appears as submission. Korinna finds herself studying her hands as they move through the familiar motions of sorting wool. These hands that have known only domestic labor, but which carry within them the inherited memory of all the women who came before her. All the countless mothers and daughters and sisters who performed these same tasks while carrying their own burdens of longing, their own carefully managed hopes, their own dreams that had to be folded and stored away like out-of-season clothing, preserved but not worn, remembered but not lived. Her fingers have grown skillful through repetition, developing the particular kind of intelligence that comes with years of practice. Yet she wonders what other kinds of intelligence they might have developed under different circumstances, in a world where feminine potential could find expression in ways that Athens does not permit. The wool beneath her touch carries its own stories, some soft as silk and white as sea foam, the luxury grade that will become undergarments for wealthy wives whose skin has never known the roughness of common fabric, whose lives unfold within layers of comfort that insulate them from the harsher realities their less fortunate sisters must navigate. Other handfuls feel coarser, still valuable but requiring different treatment, different expectations, different destinations in the complex hierarchy of textile production that mirrors the social hierarchies governing human existence. As she works to separate the grades, to remove the bits of vegetation and debris that cling to the fleece like memories of pastoral freedom, Korinna develops a deeper appreciation for the invisible labor that sustains their world. The conversations that flow between mother and daughter as the afternoon progresses carry undercurrents of instruction and warning that would be meaningless to masculine ears, but resonate with profound significance for those who must master the subtle navigation required for feminine survival. Penthesilea speaks of marriages she has observed, women she has known, the complex calculus of domestic politics that determines which wives thrive within their constraints and which merely endure them. Each story offers its own lesson about the importance of reading masculine moods, managing household resources, maintaining the delicate balance between competence and deference that society demands of women who would avoid the punishments reserved for those who forget their place. Melissa's marriage founded because she could not learn when to speak and when to remain silent, her mother observes, her voice carrying the weight of witnessing another woman's destruction through small failures that accumulated like drops of water, eventually wearing away stone. She possessed intelligence and skill in abundance, yet lacked the wisdom to understand that intelligence in women must be deployed strategically, revealed carefully, never displayed in ways that might be construed as challenge or criticism or threat to masculine authority. Her husband began to find fault with everything she did, and soon enough his family joined him in discovering inadequacies where none had existed before. The cautionary tale settles into the afternoon air like sediment in still water, carrying with it implications that extend far beyond the immediate story to encompass the fundamental precariousness of feminine existence in a world where security depends upon maintaining the approval of those who hold the power to grant or withdraw it at will. Korinna understands that she is being taught not just domestic skills, but survival strategies, not just how to manage a household, but how to manage the complex relationships that will determine her fate within that household, not just how to be a wife, but how to remain a wife whose presence is valued rather than merely tolerated. The afternoon light shifts and changes as clouds move across the sun, alternately brightening and dimming the gynaikon in patterns that seem to mirror the fluctuations of mood, hope, and resignation that mark the passage of time for those whose lives are governed by forces beyond their control. In the brighter moments, when sunshine fills the space with golden warmth, the tools of domestic labor seem almost beautiful, touched with a grace that speaks to the dignity possible even within the most restrictive circumstances. When clouds pass over and shadows fall across their work, the same objects appear heavy with the weight of endless repetition, endless obligation, endless preparation for a future that offers limited opportunities for joy or satisfaction or personal fulfillment. Korinna finds herself thinking about the nature of choice, about the difference between decisions freely made and courses of action accepted because no alternatives exist, about the complex relationship between fate and will that governs all human existence, but seems particularly cruel in its application to women who must watch their brothers and fathers and husbands exercise freedoms that will never be offered to them. The threads she guides through her needle follow predetermined patterns, creating designs that have been established by tradition and necessity, rather than personal preference or artistic vision. Yet within these constraints, she discovers small opportunities for variation, for the expression of individual taste, for the kind of subtle creativity that flourishes even under the most limiting circumstances. Her monthly bleeding, which began 2 days ago, adds its own layer of discomfort and significance to the afternoon's reflections. The cramping in her belly serves as bodily reminder of the biological destiny that makes her valuable and vulnerable in equal measure, the physical evidence of fertility that represents both her greatest asset and her most fundamental limitation. Each cycle brings her closer to the age when monthly bleeding becomes not just personal inconvenience, but public concern, when the regularity of her cycles will be monitored by others, when the absence of bleeding will be interpreted as either blessing or curse, depending upon circumstances she cannot control. The rags she uses to manage the bleeding must be washed and dried in secret, their existence acknowledged but never discussed, their practical necessity balanced against the shame that society attaches to feminine bodily functions. The extra care required during these days, the frequent changes, the careful attention to concealment, the constant awareness of potential accidents that could bring humiliation, serves as monthly reminder of the additional burdens that come with inhabiting a female body in a world designed for masculine convenience. Yet even this discomfort carries with it a strange kind of pride, the knowledge that her body functions as nature intended, that she possesses the biological qualifications necessary for the role society has assigned her. Tonight, as you rest in clean linens that require no hiding, no shame, no careful management to avoid social disgrace, perhaps reflect on how the simple biological realities of feminine existence have been transformed from sources of oppression into aspects of life that can be managed with dignity, comfort, and medical care that previous generations could never have imagined. The afternoon stretches toward evening with the measured pace of ritual, each moment bringing her closer to the night hours when different kinds of conversation become possible, when the formal instruction of daylight gives way to the more intimate sharing that occurs, when shadows provide permission for deeper honesty, greater vulnerability, the kind of communication between women that sustains them through circumstances that might otherwise prove unendurable. As the light begins to fade, as the familiar objects of the gynaikon start to blur into the comfortable dimness that makes confession easier and truth more bearable, Korinna prepares herself for the evening hours that will bring their own challenges and revelations. As the sun begins its slow descent toward the western horizon, painting the walls of the gynaikon in shades of amber and gold that speak to the beauty possible even within the most constrained circumstances, the quality of light itself seems to change, becoming softer, more forgiving, more conducive to the kind of conversations that require the gentle protection of approaching darkness to make them bearable. This is the hour when the formal instruction of daylight gives way to something more intimate, more dangerous, more necessary, the passing down of wisdom that cannot be taught through demonstration alone, but must be shared through the kind of communication that occurs between women who understand that survival requires more than technical skill, more than domestic competence, more than the careful management of appearance and reputation. The evening meal preparation becomes a meditation on the complex mathematics of feminine existence, each ingredient measured not just against the competing demands of nutrition and expense, but against the subtle requirements of social display, the need to demonstrate competence without ostentation, abundance without waste, care without extravagance. The barley for their evening porridge must be of sufficient quality to speak well of Penthesileia's management skills, yet not so fine as to suggest inappropriate luxury or poor stewardship of household resources. The dried figs that will sweeten their simple fare represent a calculated indulgence, a small pleasure that acknowledges the human need for sweetness, while remaining within the boundaries of what their modest circumstances can reasonably support. As they work side by side in the small area that serves as their kitchen, their movements falling into the synchronized rhythm of women who have shared space and tasks for so many years that cooperation has become as natural as breathing. Korinna feels the weight of inherited knowledge settling upon her shoulders like a garment passed down through generations. Each gesture her mother makes carries within it the accumulated wisdom of countless women who have faced similar challenges, similar limitations, similar requirements for adaptation and survival. The way Penthesilea tests the consistency of porridge with a wooden spoon, the manner in which she judges the proper proportion of honey to balance the bitterness of herbs, the careful attention she pays to the presentation of even the simplest meal, all speak to lessons learned through years of understanding that a woman's worth is often judged by such details, that competence in domestic arts can mean the difference between security and catastrophe in a feminine life. The conversations that accompany their evening preparations carry weight that extends far beyond their immediate content. Each seemingly casual observation about neighbors and acquaintances serving as instruction in the complex social dynamics that will govern Korinna's future existence. Penthesilea speaks of wives who have succeeded in creating harmony within their households, and others who have discovered that harmony itself can be an elusive goal, dependent upon factors that extend far beyond personal virtue or individual effort. The stories she tells serve as maps of the treacherous territory that awaits, warnings about the pitfalls that can destroy even the most carefully constructed domestic peace, guidance for navigating the complex relationships that will determine whether marriage brings fulfillment or merely endurance. Your father has been approached by Nicias, the leather worker, Penthesilea says, her voice carrying the careful neutrality of someone discussing matters of great import while maintaining the appearance of casual conversation. The initial inquiries suggest genuine interest, and his circumstances appear favorable: established business, modest but adequate property, no obvious vices or debts that might make marriage inadvisable. Your father believes the negotiations could proceed favorably if we can demonstrate appropriate domestic accomplishments and provide a dowry sufficient to make the arrangement attractive without appearing desperate. The words settle between them like stones cast into still water, creating ripples of implication that touch every aspect of Korinna's existence, every plan she might have made for her own future, every hope she might have harbored for delay or alternative possibilities. The name Nicias carries with it the weight of inevitability, the knowledge that discussions between men have begun that will shape her destiny regardless of her own preferences, feelings, or desires. She has glimpsed him perhaps half a dozen times in her carefully supervised excursions beyond their walls, a man of perhaps 30 years, neither handsome nor ugly, neither wealthy nor poor, neither kind nor cruel in any obvious way, simply present in her limited world as a possibility that has now begun to transform into probability. The leatherworker's trade speaks to steady, if unspectacular, prosperity, to skills that will always find market, to the kind of modest security that represents the height of reasonable aspiration for a potter's daughter, whose beauty is sufficient to attract attention, but whose family lacks the connections or wealth to aim higher in the social hierarchy. As evening deepens around them, and oil lamps are lit to push back the gathering darkness, the gynaikon transforms into something approaching a sanctuary, a space where the masks required for public interaction can be temporarily set aside, where the careful performance of feminine propriety can give way to more honest communication between women who understand that their survival depends upon sharing knowledge that cannot be spoken in mixed company or acknowledged in the presence of those who hold power over their lives. The flickering light creates pools of intimacy within the larger space, allowing for the kind of conversation that requires the protection of shadows, the permission of approaching night, the temporary suspension of the vigilance that governs feminine existence during daylight hours. Korinna finds herself studying her mother's face in the lamplight, searching for clues about the nature of the transformation that awaits her, the process by which a young woman with her own thoughts and dreams and fears becomes someone's wife, someone's responsibility, someone's hope for the continuation of family lines and the management of domestic affairs. Penthesileia's features, softened by the golden glow that makes even the most careworn face beautiful, carry the accumulated wisdom of 27 years of marriage, of adaptation, of the slow process by which two strangers learn to create something approaching partnership within the constraints imposed by law and custom and social expectation. "What does it feel like?" Korinna asks, her voice barely above a whisper, as if speaking too loudly might shatter the fragile intimacy of the moment, or invite unwanted attention from household spirits who might disapprove of such questioning, such curiosity about experiences that must be lived rather than understood through description. What does it feel like to belong to someone else? To have your body and your time and your thoughts become subject to another person's will and judgment and authority? The question hangs between them like incense, heavy with implication and possibility, and the kind of dangerous honesty that women rarely permit themselves in a world where survival depends upon the careful management of truth, upon the strategic deployment of silence, upon the cultivation of patience that must sometimes border on the supernatural. Penthesileia sets down her work and looks directly at her daughter, her eyes holding the weight of accumulated experience, of lessons learned through trial and accommodation, and the gradual development of wisdom that comes only to those who have navigated impossible circumstances while maintaining their essential humanity. "You learn to carry your true self more quietly," she says, her voice carrying the authority of lived experience, of knowledge earned through years of careful observation and strategic adaptation. "Marriage does not erase who you are, but it requires you to express yourself in smaller gestures, to find satisfaction in achievements that others might not recognize as achievements, to discover forms of power that operate through influence rather than authority, through patience rather than confrontation, through the cultivation of indispensability rather than the assertion of rights that society does not acknowledge." Her words settle into the evening air like seeds planted in fertile ground, carrying within them the promise of wisdom that might take years to fully understand, guidance that will only reveal its full meaning through the lived experience of the circumstances it describes. The lamp flame wavers in the slight breeze that enters through their window, causing shadows to dance across the walls in patterns that seem almost alive, almost purposeful, as if the very air around them pulses with the accumulated presence of all the women who have sat in similar rooms, having similar conversations, passing down similar wisdom to daughters who must soon leave the protection of their mother's guidance to create their own accommodations with circumstances they cannot change. In this dancing light, the familiar objects of domestic labor, the looms and spindles and baskets of prepared wool, seem transformed into something approaching the sacred, the instruments of some ancient ritual that connects them not just to their immediate ancestors, but to the long line of women who have found ways to preserve their essential humanity within circumstances designed to diminish it. The evening meal, when it comes, carries with it the weight of ritual, of the daily communion that sustains not just their bodies, but their connection to each other, their shared understanding of the challenges that await, and the resources available for meeting them. The simple porridge, sweetened with honey and enriched with nuts carefully hoarded for occasions that require small celebrations, becomes more than sustenance. It becomes a form of communion between women who understand that their strength lies not in individual achievement, but in the bonds that connect them across generations, across circumstances, across the various forms of limitation that society has constructed around feminine existence. As they eat in the comfortable silence that has developed between them over years of shared experience, shared understanding, shared preparation for futures that must be faced with courage, they are still learning to cultivate. Korinna feels something shifting within her chest, some barrier dissolving, some understanding beginning to take shape that will make the path ahead, if not easier, then at least less mysterious, less frightening, less absolute in its seeming finality. The house settles into the rhythms of night with the gradual surrender of a great creature, finally allowing itself to rest. Each sound, the banking of fires, the securing of doors, the soft footsteps of servants completing their final duties, contributing to a symphony of domestic peace that speaks to the accumulated labor of the day, the temporary satisfaction of obligations met, challenges faced, the small victories that make continuation possible. In the gynaikon, oil lamps burn lower, casting the familiar space in the kind of golden twilight that makes confession easier, truth more bearable. The sharing of deepest fears and most carefully guarded hopes, a natural extension of the intimacy that darkness provides. Korinna lies upon her narrow bed, the straw mattress beneath her body a reminder of her family's modest circumstances, yet luxurious beyond imagining when compared to the sleeping arrangements of Athens' poorest citizens. The thin woolen blanket that covers her both protection against the night's chill and symbol of the careful economy that governs every aspect of their existence. The familiar weight of the blanket, woven by her mother's hands from wool they had prepared together through countless hours of shared labor, carries within it more than mere warmth. It represents the accumulation of effort, patience, skill that transforms raw material into comfort, chaos into order, possibility into reality, through the steady application of feminine wisdom. The sounds that drift through the night air speak to the larger world that surrounds their domestic sanctuary. The distant barking of dogs who guard other households, the occasional call of the night watch as they make their rounds through darkened streets, the faint echo of voices from taverns where men gather to drink wine and debate philosophy and politics, while women remain safely enclosed within walls that protect them from dangers they are taught to fear, yet also protect others from the disruption their presence might cause to the serious business of masculine discourse. Each sound serves as reminder of the vast city that pulses with life beyond their narrow confines, the complex society that provides the context for their existence while offering them little opportunity to participate in its creation or direction. Her mother moves through their shared space with the quiet efficiency of someone for whom these evening rituals have become as natural as breathing, banking the small fire that provides their heat, checking the oil levels in their lamps, performing the countless small tasks that mark the boundary between day and night, between the public performance of daylight hours and the private honesty that darkness permits. The soft rustle of her movements, the gentle clink of ceramic against ceramic as she arranges their few possessions in preparation for tomorrow's activities, creates a background of domestic harmony that speaks to years of practice, decades of accommodation to circumstances that might have seemed impossible to bear when first encountered, but which have gradually become simply the shape that life takes when lived within particular constraints. The negotiations will begin soon, Penthesilea says, her voice carrying the weight of inevitability, of decisions made by others that will reshape Korinna's existence in ways both fundamental and irreversible. Your father believes Nicias will prove receptive to reasonable terms, and his family's inquiries suggest genuine interest rather than mere curiosity. If all proceeds favorably, contracts could be signed before winter. Marriage celebrated before spring brings the season when young couples traditionally begin their lives together. Each word falls like a stone into still water, creating ripples that spread through Korinna's consciousness, touching every plan she might have made, every hope she might have harbored, every dream she might have nurtured during the years when her future seemed distant enough to remain negotiable. The timeline that her mother outlines transforms the abstract possibility of marriage into concrete reality, dates and seasons and specific expectations that will govern the months ahead. Before winter, a phrase that carries within it the weight of urgency, the knowledge that time has become precious, finite, something to be carefully managed rather than casually spent. The image of herself as a bride, dressed in the finest gynaikon her family's resources can provide, surrounded by the ritual celebrations that mark the transition from maiden to wife, feels simultaneously inevitable and impossible, like looking at her reflection in disturbed water, where the general shape remains recognizable while specific details blur into uncertainty. As the night deepens around them, as the last sounds of activity from the street below fade into the profound quiet that settles over Athens during the hours when even the most industrious citizens surrender to the necessity of rest, the quality of conversation between mother and daughter shifts into something more intimate, more dangerous, more essential. This is the hour when the masks required for survival during daylight can be temporarily set aside, when the careful performance of feminine propriety gives way to the kind of honesty that women share only with each other, only in the protection of darkness, only when the immediate pressures of social expectation have been temporarily suspended. I want to tell you about love, Penthesilea says, her voice carrying a gentleness that Korinna has rarely heard, the kind of tenderness that emerges only when defenses have been lowered, when the constant vigilance required for feminine survival has been momentarily relaxed. Not the kind of love that poets celebrate in their verses about gods and heroes, not the passionate intensity that leads to tragedy and destruction in the stories men tell about women who forget their proper places, but the quieter kind of love that grows slowly between two people who learn to care for each other within the boundaries that society has drawn around their relationship. The words settle into the darkness like seeds planted in fertile ground, carrying within them possibilities that Korinna has hardly dared to imagine, hope that she has been afraid to cultivate, lest it make her disappointment more acute when reality proves less generous than fantasy. The idea that marriage might bring not just obligation and constraint, but actual affection, genuine partnership, the kind of mutual care that makes burdens lighter rather than heavier, transforms the future from a sentence to be endured into something that might actually be worth anticipating. Your father and I began as strangers, her mother continues, her voice taking on the reflective quality that comes with examining the past from the perspective of accumulated wisdom, of understanding earned through years of patience and accommodation, and the gradual discovery that happiness can take forms very different from those imagined in youth, arranged by our families for practical reasons, brought together by considerations of property and social advantage, rather than personal preference or individual attraction. Yet over the years, through the shared experience of building a household together, raising children together, facing challenges together, we have developed something that might reasonably be called love, though it bears little resemblance to the dramatic passion that features in stories told for entertainment. The revelation that her parents' marriage, which has always seemed to Korinna to represent the natural order of things, actually began with the same kind of uncertainty and apprehension that she now faces, creates a subtle shift in her understanding of what the future might hold. The possibility that strangers can become partners, that obligation can evolve into affection, that the constraints of marriage might actually provide the framework within which genuine intimacy can develop, offers a different perspective on the transformation that awaits her. one that emphasizes potential rather than limitation, growth rather than surrender. The oil lamp gutters as its fuel runs low, the flame growing smaller and more uncertain, casting the gynaikon in the kind of dim golden light that makes everything seem touched with magic, with possibility, with the promise that even the most ordinary circumstances might conceal extraordinary potential. In this forgiving illumination, the tools of domestic labor that fill their shared space seem less like instruments of confinement and more like the means by which women create beauty, comfort, order from the raw materials of existence, transforming through patience and skill the chaos of daily life into something approaching art. The fear you feel is natural, Penthesilea says, reaching across the space between their beds to take her daughter's hand in her own, the physical contact serving as bridge between their separate experiences, their different perspectives, their shared understanding of what it means to be female in a world designed primarily for masculine convenience. Marriage represents the unknown, the surrender of familiar routines and relationships for circumstances that cannot be predicted or controlled. Yet it also represents opportunity, the chance to create something new, to develop capacities you did not know you possessed, to discover forms of strength and wisdom that emerge only when necessity demands them. The warmth of her mother's hand, calloused from years of weaving and household labor yet gentle in its touch, speaks to the accumulated wisdom of feminine experience, the knowledge that women pass between themselves about survival, adaptation, the cultivation of hope within circumstances that might otherwise prove unbearable. In this simple gesture of physical comfort, Korinna finds something approaching peace, not the resignation of defeat, but the deeper tranquility that comes with acceptance of what cannot be changed, combined with determination to find meaning and dignity within whatever circumstances life provides. As the lamp flame flickers one final time and dies, plunging the gynaikon into the complete darkness that will shelter their sleep until dawn, brings another day of preparation, another step closer to the transformation that awaits. Korinna lies listening to the soft rhythm of her mother's breathing, the quiet sounds of night settling over their household, the distant pulse of a city that sleeps unaware of the small dramas unfolding within individual homes, individual hearts, individual lives that history will never record, but which nevertheless represent the true substance of human experience. In the darkness, surrounded by the familiar scents of wool and olive oil, and the lingering sweetness of honey from their evening meal, Korinna allows herself to imagine a different kind of future than the one she had feared. Not a future of unlimited freedom, for such freedom remains impossible within the world she inhabits, but a future in which the limitations imposed by society might serve as the framework within which genuine happiness, real partnership, authentic love might actually flourish. The possibility that constraint itself might become the condition for a different kind of fulfillment, one measured not by the scope of choices available, but by the depth of meaning discovered within whatever choices life provides, offers a new way of thinking about the path that lies ahead. The night deepens around them, wrapping their household in the kind of profound quiet that makes sleep possible, dreams achievable, the temporary suspension of consciousness that allows the spirit to rest from the day's labors and prepare for tomorrow's challenges. Yet even as her body relaxes into sleep's embrace, even as her conscious mind releases its grip on the day's worries and tomorrow's uncertainties, something within Korinna's chest continues to pulse with the knowledge that she carries within herself, something that no law can regulate, no custom can entirely constrain, no marriage contract can completely claim. The essential core of selfhood that makes her human, that connects her to every woman who has faced similar circumstances throughout history, that will persist regardless of what external forms her life may take. And so we leave Korinna in the embracing darkness of the gynaikon, surrounded by the tools and symbols of feminine existence that have shaped countless lives across countless generations, yet carrying within herself something that transcends the particular limitations of her time and place, the fundamental human capacity for adaptation, for finding meaning within constraint, for discovering forms of dignity and purpose that society neither recognizes nor validates, yet which nonetheless represent the true foundation upon which civilizations rest and human experience achieves its deepest significance. Her story, quiet and constrained though it may appear when measured against the grand narratives of wars and politics and masculine achievement that dominate historical records, speaks to experiences that have shaped the majority of human existence throughout most of recorded time. The experiences of those whose lives were governed by circumstances beyond their control, whose potential was channeled into narrow streams by social structures they could not influence, whose contributions to human flourishing occurred within domestic spheres that history typically overlooks, yet which provided the essential foundation for everything that history chooses to remember and celebrate. As we return from Korinna's world to your comfortable present, perhaps we can carry with us something more than just another tale of ancient limitation and quiet endurance. Her story speaks across 25 centuries to remind us that the distance between her narrow gynaikon and your boundless possibilities reflects not inevitable progress, but specific choices made by countless individuals who decided that human dignity matters more than social control, that potential deserves opportunity regardless of gender, that the artificial boundaries societies construct around human capability serve no purpose except to diminish the total achievement possible when all minds are free to contribute their best thinking to the challenges that face every generation. The freedoms you enjoy as you listen to these words, the right to education that develops your full intellectual potential, to property ownership that provides economic independence, to freedom of movement that allows you to explore the world beyond domestic walls, to participation in the political processes that shape the societies you inhabit, to careers that utilize your talents regardless of traditional gender expectations, represent victories won by women who fought their battles in privacy and shadow, whose resistance took the form of whispered conversations and quiet persistence rather than public demonstration, whose small rebellions accumulated like snowflakes until they became avalanches of change that transformed the very foundations of human society. Every book you read, every choice you make about your own life, every moment when you speak your thoughts freely without fear of punishment or social ostracism, honors the memory of countless women like Korinna who lived and died within circumstances that gave them no such opportunities yet, who somehow managed to preserve and pass down the essential knowledge that human potential cannot be permanently contained by artificial barriers, that dignity persists even under impossible conditions, that the human spirit possesses resources for growth and adaptation that societies consistently underestimate and frequently attempt to suppress. The thread that connects us to Korinna stretches across 25 centuries of human development, yet it remains unbroken, woven from the accumulated struggles and small victories of countless women whose names we will never know, whose individual stories were never considered worth preserving, whose collective experience created the foundation upon which every subsequent expansion of human freedom has been built. Sleep now, dear listener, and remember that you participate in the ongoing conversation between generations about what it means to be human. What possibilities should be available to all people, regardless of the circumstances of their birth? What forms of dignity and achievement and happiness represent the birthright of every consciousness capable of dreaming of something better than the limitations others might try to impose? Your dreams tonight might carry echoes of ancient wisdom, fragments of understanding that traveled impossible distances through time and circumstance to reach minds like yours that value freedom, not just for its own sake, but for its capacity to multiply human potential, to unlock capabilities that remain hidden when artificial barriers prevent their expression. Rest knowing that every moment of intellectual curiosity you experience honors the memory of women who were forbidden to ask questions. Every career achievement you accomplish continues work that countless previous generations were prevented from beginning. Every choice you make about your own life represents a victory that Korinna could never have imagined, but which builds upon foundations laid by her quiet endurance, her refusal to surrender her essential humanity despite circumstances designed to diminish it. Until we meet again in another corner of history's vast tapestry, may you rest knowing that you carry within yourself the same resilient spirit that sustained Korinna through her confined existence, the same capacity for adaptation and growth that has allowed humanity to progress from the restricted world of ancient Athens to the expanded possibilities of your own era, the same fundamental dignity that connects all human experience across time and circumstance, and the endless variety of forms that constraint and freedom can take. Good night, and may your sleep be filled with dreams that connect you to the eternal human project of expanding the boundaries of what is possible, of ensuring that future generations inherit even greater opportunities for flourishing than those available to us, of creating a world where every human being can develop their full potential regardless of artificial limitations based on gender, birth, or any other characteristic that has nothing to do with the capacity for growth, wisdom, and contribution to the magnificent ongoing experiment of human consciousness, exploring its own possibilities. If you found comfort in this journey through history's shadows, please consider subscribing to join our community of gentle souls who believe the most important stories are often the hardest ones to hear. Like and share if this tale has touched your heart, and let me know in the comments where you're listening from tonight. There's something magical about knowing our little corner of history reaches around the world to bring people together in understanding and compassion. Sweet dreams, and remember that every breath you take in freedom honors the memory of those who breathed only within walls they could not escape yet, who somehow managed to keep alive the flame of human possibility that now illuminates your world.